It's time to get your music radio ready with the Audio Skills Podcast. It doesn't matter what type of music you're creating or what gear you use. It's all about the technique. Get ready to turn your home studio into a place where your music goes platinum. Now give it up for your host, Scott Hawksworth.
How's it going, everyone? Scott here, bringing you another episode of the Audio Skills Podcast. In this week's episode, we're going to be continuing our discussion all about recording with Kendal Osborne, who is owner of The Closet Studios and host of the Recording Lounge podcast. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I'd highly recommend that you check that episode out first. With all that said, before we get back into the interview with Kendal, I wanted to give you your audio tip of the week. And every week I try to give podcast listeners the same kinds of takeaways that you can get when you watch our YouTube channel or join audioskills.com. And for this week's tip, I want to talk about vocal technique when recording. So whether you're recording yourself or recording other singers or artists, you want to practice good technique with the mic and encourage those artists to practice good technique if they're singing, for example. And some key tips to accomplish this. Number 1, realize if you're recording the vocalist with the mic that's much closer, say you've mic'd them, they're standing about maybe 6 to 8 inches away from the microphone or something like that. Any movement is going to be magnified the closer that you are to the microphone. It's something called the proximity effect, which Kendal will actually speak to. But so if you have a singer who moves their head around a lot or they really get into it, that's going to show up with huge level changes on the recording, and it's not going to really be workable for you if you are trying to record them close mic'd and they're leaning in back and forth like I might be doing to this microphone here. So when possible, make sure if you're recording a close, intimate vocal that you're keeping your head movements or the head movements of your artist to a minimum. Another tip here, second, try recording the vocal from a few positions. And this goes back to last week's 2-position rule tip where I was talking about choice and everything. If nothing else, you can get some great takes that you can piece together with a vocal comp and you can really get great results. So you should also, if possible, try recording a vocal with a few different mics. You never know what might work best. Number 3, you should never record vocals sitting down if you can avoid it. Whether you have to create some kind of unique setup to position the mic for a standing vocalist, or if you need to literally stand there and hold it for them, or easiest, just get a microphone stand of some kind. But you want to be supported and capture the best performance, whether it's you or your vocalist. If they are sitting down, they might be hunched over, their diaphragm's not, supporting their voice. These are just principles of regular singing that are so key to recording a great vocal performance. Number 4, don't touch the mic when you're singing. And if you're recording someone else, make sure the vocalist doesn't touch the mic. I know some people really get into it, but just leave it alone. Recording is not the same thing as performing. And so if you're grabbing the mic stand and things like that, kicking the stand or something like that, that's going to show up on the recording and you'll be unhappy. And then my 5th and final tip related to this is, stay hydrated and warm up before you get ready to record, and make sure your vocalist has done the same if it's not you singing. The idea when you are recording is you want to capture the best performance. So imagine if every single performance you've ever had, you want to capture the best in a recording. And part of that is making sure that you're warmed up, making sure that you're hydrated, making sure that, you're using all the best techniques and things like that. That is what it's all about. So those are just a few vocal mic recording technique tips. Now, without further ado, I want to get back to part 2 of my interview with Kendal Osborne, where he shares his recording expertise with us. Okay, so now you mentioned this just a moment ago. You mentioned the proximity effect. And
right.
This is something that is very important, I think, for people to understand. Can you explain what the proximity effect is and how it applies to recording?
Absolutely. So the proximity effect is a side effect of directional microphones, which is basically every pattern except omnidirectional. So that's cardioid, hypercardioid, supercardioid, wide cardioid, and figure eight. All of those exhibit proximity effect, whether it's condenser, ribbon, dynamic, it's about the pattern. So what that essentially means is as you get closer to a directional microphone, the low end will build up exponentially. So as I get really close to my microphone here, so it gets kind of woofy and boomy. And now that I'm like a foot away, it gets really thin. So it's, just like that, you can hear it very dramatically, right? And I'm only moving within a foot, right? Like I'm leaning in and leaning back. I'm not like 2 feet away. Now, here's something a lot of people don't realize is that, when you look at a frequency response graph from microphones, most of those are measured at 1 meter away, which is kind of the standard for measuring frequency response for a lot of things. But, when's the last time you mic'd up a vocal from a meter away? Never. Yeah. Like that's, very, very rarely do we mic up a vocal from a meter away or a guitar amp, it's just not that common. So, but starting about a meter away, that's where the proximity effect seems to start to take place. And that's one of the reasons why they measure it at a meter is, from that point on, the response doesn't change a whole lot anyway. But by the time you're a few inches away from a microphone, the proximity effect can be overwhelming. And again, I wouldn't call it a problem per se, so much as just something you have to manage and deal with. You can use it to your advantage, or, it can hurt you. Like I said earlier, if you've got a mic on a tiny singer or someone whose voice sounds tiny or small, you can beef them up by moving them closer to the microphone. And this will help get a little bit more low end warmth and fullness.
Right. So you're taking advantage of it.
Right. You're using it to your advantage and making it work for you. Now, of course, sometimes things like that don't always work because, for example, if you've got a singer that likes to move around a lot, putting a microphone 3 inches from their face isn't going to work. I mean, it can hinder their performance and they might literally bump into it. So, sometimes you can't do that. So it's useful to have microphones that have a lot of low end. So you can use a microphone with a lot of low end from a foot away and it still sounds full. Like there are certain microphones that are designed to be close microphones and some that are designed to be far field microphones. A great example of this is AEA makes 2 active ribbon mics in their sort of Nuvo series, which is the N22 and the N8. And they're very similar microphones in design and look and everything, but the N22 is designed for close miking and the N8 is designed for far miking. And both of those don't really sound great in the opposite role because
they're not made for that.
Right. The N8 just has so much low end if you're up close to it. I mean, like ungodly amounts of low end. But if it's 10 feet away as a room mic, it's like, wow, it sounds balanced and full, Whereas if you put the N22 10 feet away, it sounds lifeless, like there's no low end. And so that's because they're handling that proximity effect and making it part of the sound, So the same goes for like guitar amps and stuff like that. A lot of times we mic guitar amps really close. So if you've got a microphone like, go figure, an SM57 that captures the sort of mid-range and top and the aggression and the attack of the guitar, then you can just move the microphone, forward and back closer and farther from the amp to sort of tailor the low-end response. Now, the one warning I will say about proximity effect is that it's not always like a pretty sounding low end. Like it's, it's low end, but it's not always great sounding. Sometimes it can be, like this when I get really close to the mic, like it's not like, wow, it sounds like huge. And, it can sometimes sound boomy and woofy. And I see a lot of, this could almost be my answer to a question a couple ago, but I see a lot of young engineers or neophyte engineers rather miking lots of things up really closely. And then they'll have to use a high pass filter on everything set really, really high, like 200, 300 hertz. And, that's really high to me on a lot of things. And I mean, like hi-hat, nobody cares, but and proximity effect can actually distort the capsule, because that's happening. The first thing your vocal or your guitar amp is hitting is the capsule, and it can actually sort of like distort the capsule or the amplifier in that microphone. So it's not really the same thing as just recording close and then high passing, right? It's different. And so like, people of the world, stop miking acoustic guitar from like 3 inches away. Like, that doesn't, like, you will make that acoustic boomy and terrible. So like the proximity effect on acoustic guitar, for whatever reason, is massive. And I don't know why. I guess it's just because there's like this hole cut in the guitar and a lot of pressure's coming out of it. I don't really know why, but like, try recording acoustic guitar from like 12 inches or 20 inches away. And then you'll only have to set your high pass filter for what it's really intended for, which is like, rumble and crap like that, like below 50 hertz. Like, okay, the low E string on a guitar is 82.5 hertz. And so to me, when you play a big E chord, if you put a high pass filter higher than 82, I mean, you're cutting out the fundamental.
The fundamental frequencies.
Yeah.
There.
So, but again, a lot of people do that because they'll have too much proximity effect. That's what they're actually hearing. And so, if you move your microphones back a little bit, then the low end pressure sort of relaxes a little. Maybe that's the word. And the sounds seem a little bit tighter. And so then your high pass filter can just be a rumble filter. And if you need to take down low end, so this is like such a long answer. I'm so sorry.
No, it's great.
But,
great stuff.
Okay, so this is just geek stuff now. So if you're not a geek, you can fast forward a couple minutes. But so
you can glaze over if you want.
So because sound is logarithmic and it follows the inverse square law, small moves, especially up close, can make huge differences. So like the one rule that a lot of people know is the 6 dB rule, which basically says for every double distance, the sound pressure level halves roughly, which is minus 6 dB. And for every half distance, the sound pressure level doubles or, plus 6 dB. So like something that is 70 dB SPL, twice that loudness is 76, twice that loudness is 82, twice that is 88, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So moving a mic from 6 inches to 12 inches is a huge change, not only in proximity effect, but in volume and tonality and all that stuff. Now, use your brain here and think like, okay, well, if you're farther away from something like 10 feet, you're not going to hear as much of a change unless you move to 20 feet. You know what I mean? Like, so the closer you are to something, the more dramatic microphone interaction and microphone tone and proximity effect and all that stuff is, and the more dramatic level changes can be. So moving from 1 inch to 2 inches is a huge change, as opposed to, moving 10 feet to 11 feet is not that big of a change. So anyway, proximity effect. So
that's proximity effect.
Yeah. So proximity effect tends to build up about, give or take, 6 dB per octave. It's not an exact number. It is different for every mic. And, but that's a rough figure that seems to represent a lot of proximity effect in a lot of microphones. So I would recommend, if you're going to use a high pass filter to combat proximity effect, try 6 dB per octave. It's very smooth. It's very, easy on the ears. It's also phase coherent, unlike a lot of higher order filters, 12 dB, 18 dB per octave. It has a lot tighter phase response than those. And, I would say starting at maybe 200 hertz or 250 hertz or something, 6 dB per octave is a pretty good offset for proximity effect. But you can also use a shelf, which is really nice and mellow. But all of this nerdy stuff aside, just record it better. Let's start.
Just sum it all up.
To sum it all up, yeah. Just use proximity effect, to your advantage and adjust it as needed. And, it's not something you should fear, but it's also not something that you should embrace. It's something that it's just part of the game. And if you're really afraid of it, just use Omni mics.
For sure. There you go.
You won't have any. Yeah. So, and it's the other thing I'd like to say is that it's different for every mic. Some microphones, they have a ton of proximity effect, and other microphones like an RE20, even though it's a cardioid mic, even though it's a large diaphragm dynamic mic, for whatever reason, the RE20 has very minimal proximity effect. And I don't know why. I guess it's maybe the venting they do on the side or some sort of weird voodoo that they do in the design, but it doesn't have a ton of proximity effect. So, when you're testing out microphones or considering buying, try to make sure you test the proximity effect, like move close to it. How even is it? Is the proximity effect like really quickly onset? Because like I said, if a singer moves around a lot, like the tone can change like drastically if the proximity effect is kind of weird and, doesn't have a wide sweet spot, if you will.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anyway, so sorry, that was such a
that was good, man. That's great stuff. So, okay, kind of staying on the microphone discussion here.
I love mics. I could talk
about. As many of us know, there are three, I'd say, main types of microphones out there, and
right.
Umbrella types. You've got your dynamic, you got your condensers, and you got your ribbon mics.
Yes.
And people who are either starting out or maybe they've been recording for a little bit, I often recommend that one of the best things you can do is try to build that microphone collection.
Totally.
It's not about getting, spending all the money on all the gear, but, give yourself options, give yourself, other things you can reach for depending on the situation.
Totally.
Can you give us an overview of just in general, and of course there's always specific, things you're trying to address, but an overview of the things that you might use each specific type of microphone for in a recording session?
Sure. And yeah, I'd just like to mention that you're preaching the truth. Like growing your microphone collection is really, really important. And a lot of people will debate online, like what's more important and, preamps and this and blah, blah, blah. And the longer I do this, the more that I realize, microphones are to audio engineers as hand tools are to carpenters. Like there are primary tools that we use to capture sounds. Like, because you never know who's going to walk in the door with what guitar or what amp. And so like the first
voice.
Yeah, or what voice, like you never know. And so the first thing that it's going to hit is that mic. And you know what I mean? Like, and then it's going to hit the room, and the room's going to, have reflections, and it's going to come back into the mic. And so like, that's the source, and so like having lots of different microphones, and you don't have to have like 1,000, I'm just saying like options, right? Like what you said is totally true. Anyway. Okay. So like dynamic mics, super great when you need tons of volume handling or SPL handling, snare drum, kick drum, guitar amps, stuff like that. I mean, they're fantastic for that. They're good for loud vocalists. They're great for broadcast vocals, great for like, the SM7 and the RE20 are like radio standards for like 50 years, right? Dynamics tend to be a little more colored out of the box. And what I mean by that, not like analog color or anything, not like that type of color, but I mean like they have a very distinct mid-range and, usually a tighter low end, whereas ribbons and condensers tend to sound a bit more natural or realistic or whatever. That's not a bad thing. I mean, dynamic mics and their specific tonalities can really work wonders and save you a lot of time because they have very distinct voicings. Like if you look at the frequency response of, a nice condenser microphone versus a dynamic, you might be like, what the heck? Like the dynamic is like crazy. But I mean, they save you a lot of time. Like if you tried to record everything with just like a flat mic and EQ it all later, like how much time is that wasting? Like there's a reason we like, SM7s on vocals and we like SM57s on guitar amps. Like they just have a thing and they work. Okay. Ribbon mics. Ribbon mics are some of my favorite microphones and I use them a lot. They're great for anything that has a tendency to get harsh. So let's be honest, like a lot of sounds can get harsh. You know what I mean? Like horns can be harsh, vocals can be harsh, guitars can be harsh. Banjos, mandolins, violins, fiddles, cellos, they can be harsh. I mean, strings on all those instruments are metal, right? Like it could be harsh. Ribbons are typically very smooth, very full, sometimes downright dark. But one of the great things about ribbons is that they don't have capsule distortion because they don't have a capsule. And so they take EQ really well and they sound really natural. I use them all the time on guitar amps and horns and strings, folk instruments, classical instruments. They're really fantastic as drum overheads and room mics. They kind of help tame those cymbals. Cymbals, oh man, another thing that can just rip your head
harsh.
Oh man, yeah. Especially with like really hard or heavy cymbals like A customs or things like that are really heavy cymbals. They can just be super loud and harsh, but ribbons are great for that. Condensers, of course, are generally the highest fidelity, highest output, lowest noise option out there. And they get used a lot in the studio.
Yeah.
Vocals are the obvious answer. They have the detail that we want on a vocal, but I mean, they're great on overheads. My primary overheads are condensers. They're great on toms, acoustic instruments of any kind, guitar, piano, mandolin.
Oh, yeah.
Anything. I mean, fantastic with that. Condensers, the big thing that people need to know is that there are so many out there, and they're also different, like small diaphragm, large diaphragm, solid state, tube, hybrid, dual diaphragm.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many out there now. Like, whereas dynamics, it's like you got bigger ones and you got smaller ones. That's pretty much, yeah. You know what I mean? Like, there's like large diaphragm and then like medium diaphragm, like a 57 is kind of like medium territory. And, and like ribbons, there's like long ribbon, short ribbon, active, passive, and that's pretty much it. And, obviously the details of each mic are, different, but condensers, there are so many options, and condensers often also are the ones that have the multiple polar pattern options and are more likely to have, selectable polar patterns or like capsules that you can interchange. And I mean, they're just like so versatile. I mean, in general, you can record almost anything with a condenser, and, everybody should have one. But I would say, having all three is really important. You got to have different tools at your disposal to be able to capture different things. And let me be clear, like using one mic on everything isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just tends to create a lot more work for you later.
Right. You're going to have to do some work on the back end there.
Yeah. EQ things differently to make them sound, not like they're all recorded with the same mic. And, for example, like our lead vocal, backing vocal thing, another thing that I like to do is record the backing vocalist with a darker sounding mic, because I want the lead vocalist to have, the upfront, airy, clear sound. And I want my backing vocalist not only to sit back, in depth, but also in tonality just a little bit, sit right behind the lead. So I'll use a darker mic on the backing vocalist. Well, if you record a lead vocal and 5 backing vocals, you with the same mic, you immediately have to go in and EQ all that stuff now. Like,
right.
Or it's like, okay, that just, wasted another, couple minutes or whatever, 5 minutes. And that might sound like I'm like splitting hairs here, but you save 5 minutes 100 times. I mean, do the math.
Yeah, that's good.
It really adds up. So anyway, but if you only have one mic, like that's totally fine. And like, I know a lot of people just starting only have 1 or 2 mics, and like, that's totally fine. Just, realize that using different mics allows you to capture things in special ways, and things naturally will separate a little bit better in the mix, and they'll naturally sort of have their own sort of definitive tone on things. And so hopefully that answered the question.
No, that does. And I think, yeah, so people don't get discouraged if you only have 1 or 2 mics. Right. I always advocate, especially people who are starting out or want to grow their studio, piecemeal. So, okay, you've got your 1 or 2 mics, save up, do some research, and then build it slowly next time you get that Christmas bonus or whatever.
Right.
And build it over time. And don't feel, because that's the other thing, is I think some people who are maybe just getting into it get overwhelmed, and they're like, well, I don't have $2,000 to go get 50 mics or whatever. You don't have to do that. You can get a few good mics and then build it piece by piece. And what's nice is your skills will be improving and your ear will be improving. You'll be knowing what you like, what you don't like, and that will only help you as you add more.
Right. And a lot of people, another thing that people need to realize is that microphones, the price is not always reflective, correctly of what they do, right? Like, yes, there are microphones out there like a 251 that's like $18,000, and it is not a better mic per se than, a $2,000 mic. You're paying for the name, you're paying for the history of it, you're paying for a complete authentic replication of a microphone that's actually worth much more than that. So, but like an SM57, we all have them. They're $100. They're great. They do things that, I'm not picking a $2,000 microphone over an SM57 on a guitar amp. Like, I'm not. Like, I use a 57. My go-to electric guitar setup is an SM57 and a Royer 121 ribbon. And that's my go-to setup. I will sometimes use, however, on heavier guitar sounds, like, harder rock stuff and metal and stuff like that, I'm using a 57 and a 421, or a 57 and another 57. And it's like, I'm not picking it based on the price. You know what I mean? They all have a function. Like some of my favorite microphones are what some people might call cheap, but they serve a purpose. And so don't get discouraged by like, oh, well, I don't have $2,000. Like you said, I can't afford this mic. It's like, okay, well then get a good mic in a price range that makes sense. Like dynamics tend to be the cheapest. Ribbons are next, and condensers, are kind of all over the map. Condensers go from like $50 to like $20,000. So,
yeah.
But, I would say if I had to like set price points, I would say like under, like $100 to $500 will get you like a plenty good dynamic mic, like that will last you your whole life. I mean, they are so durable. And in ribbons, like, $500 to $1,500, like you can get some of the best ribbon mics on the market are like $2,000, like on the whole market. And whereas like some of the quote best condenser mics are like $5,000, $10,000, whatever. And so like ribbon mics are more affordable than most people think. And there are lots of great companies making affordable ribbon mics that are fantastic. And, condenser mics, I would say, it all depends. Like small diaphragms are generally going to be a little cheaper. But again, like you got to pick what's going to fix a problem or solve a problem or fill a need. If you do a lot of vocals, then, maybe consider saving up for that large diaphragm condenser or, like an SM7 or something like that. Like, think about what you need, what's going to fix a problem, make your job easier, make it faster, make it more fun, more efficient. Rather than just like, oh, well, these people say I need a U87 and I can't afford one. And it's like, no, what is it that you really need? What you need is a recording issue fixed. You know what I mean? Like that's, people kind of reverse it sometimes. They're like, oh, I need a large diaphragm condenser. It's like, no, what you need is a good mic for vocals. Like that's what you need.
Right.
The gear is just like, how much can you afford and what's your budget? And, sure, I do totally support the idea of like buy nice or buy twice, like
sure.
Don't just buy like bargain basement stuff and say like, oh, it's fine. Try to get good stuff. But like at the same time, don't, just like spend all of your college savings to, get some microphone. It's not going to make it, like worlds better. You know what I mean? Like I've got probably 50 something microphones. I've got a lot of mics. And when I record a vocalist, I set up 5 of them and I have them sing a verse and a chorus on each one. And these mics range in price from $350 to $5,000. And they will speak. I mean, they'll tell me which one they like the best. And I will pick the one that sounds the best on their voice. And I don't care how much it costs, whether it's the $1,000 one or the $350 one, it has nothing to do with that. It's all about what works. And having those options is great to be able to, to pick what works best with a singer or whatever. But, there are fantastic microphones at all price points.
Absolutely. Okay, this is a fun question here. What is the most creative thing you've either personally done or seen done in order to capture a great or unique sound for a recording or address a recording challenge?
Man, that's tricky. I can think of a couple small, I don't know if these are like the most creative things, but I can think of 2. So one thing that I've done in the past that I really like doing is running backing vocal groups through guitar amps with spring reverb. Sort of, and then of course miking it up. It has this sort of like old radio, like Beach Boys type vocal sound because of the spring reverb and because of the filtering of the guitar speaker and of the amp. It kind of has this old, like kind of distorted radio thing. And that's really neat. You got to be really careful with the gain and make sure it's not distorting or anything. But that's really cool. And you said also like address a recording challenge. So one of the challenges that a lot of people face is when they're recording drums, the kick drum moves. Like, what I'm talking about, right? Like the drummer, as they hit the drum, it moves forward. So my trick for that is to actually, you put another kick pedal on the front side of the drum. And that keeps it from moving. Now, I've put all kinds of things in front of kick drums to keep, I have like a car jack that's like 70 pounds. I've done all kinds of stuff, but putting another kick pedal seems to work really well on the front side of the kick drum to keep it from moving. So that's a kind of a trick that I like to use. Man, if you really want to see like creative and wild recording techniques, you got to like all the listeners out there, go follow Sylvia Massey on Facebook because she is she's arguably the most creative engineer that I've ever even heard of in my life. And go check out her book, Recording Unhinged. I mean, the whole book is basically about that. Like it's, about strange recording techniques and creative, fun recording. And I mean, obviously she's worked on like huge records like Tool and System of a Down and stuff like that. But I mean, she's just, I don't know where those ideas come from, but she's, her Facebook page is just like constantly, like every time I go see it, I'm just like, what the heck are you doing? You're putting a pickle in between the guitar amp and the speaker cabinet and seeing if it glows. And I mean, it's just wild. It's like, and somehow it works. Like somehow she makes it work. And I don't know. She's awesome. And I've been trying to get her on my show for a couple months, but she's been so busy. She's like overseas right now, like recording in a castle or something. I don't know.
Oh, you're recording in a castle. That's awesome. Wow. So I've only got a few more questions here and kind of shifting gears a little bit, but you've talked a lot about, working with different artists and musicians and things like that. What advice would you have for engineers or someone who's, trying to start up a recording business or something like that, and who wants to get the best performances out of artists in their studios? There's a lot of people who maybe they aren't socially the most gregarious person out there or what have you. What sort of advice would you have for that?
Well, I mean, I'm definitely an introvert by nature. I mean, I love talking about audio and I love talking about music, but I mean, I'm very much an introverted person. I spend most of my time, just hanging out with my wife, and that's pretty much it.
Right on.
I don't go to parties at all. I mean, I try to go to shows every now and then, but so, anyway, don't worry about like, oh, well, I'm not, because it's something you love. I think all of those worries will, go away. And I think young engineers that are like, oh, well, do I have the right personality? Like, do people want to work with me or whatever? Like, just be you, and like the people that want to work with you will work with you, and, don't worry about that. But in terms of getting good performances, and that's such a good question. And it's so important because that's, we've been talking about this today. Like, that's what it's about, right? Like getting good sources, and like the source is what counts. So I would say the simple answer to that is just like, don't get in the way. Like, really try to figure out what they have in their head and what their music sounds like in their brain, and like try to understand the vision and their influences and what they think they sound like and what they actually sound like. And I mean, that's really difficult. Like, that's difficult for even the best seasoned pros out there that have been doing this 4 times as long as I have. And I mean, how they hear their music is really difficult for us on the other side of the glass to like interpret, because we're not in their head. And so they can't always vocalize it. I mean, and we shouldn't expect them to either. Like, granted, some clients don't really have very much of a vision and you kind of have to help them along. But most of the time they have some sort of idea of what their goal is, what their vision is, what their concept is. And you want to try to really focus on that. It's their record. It's their sounds. It's them, and how you can be the facilitator of good things. So, for example, it starts with just simple stuff and you can get complex with it. Simple things like picking a microphone. When you're doing a mic shootout between a couple mics, it's really important to me to ask them, which one do you like the best? Like, which one sounded best in the headphones? And maybe they don't have a preference, but if they do, like, that mic might get a vote. You know what I mean? Like, because it's like, well, I kind of like mic number 2 a little better, but just a little, but they like mic number 1 like a lot more in their headphones for whatever reason. I mean, I'm going to pick that one, and if stuff like that, I mean, or drummers, for example, like drummers need to be able to feel really comfortable sitting at the kit. Like, they need to be able to move their stuff around and get it exactly right. And so like, don't just be like, oh, I'm going to move your stuff because I have to get a microphone in here. Like, work around it. You know what I mean? Like, work around their most comfortable. Like the goal of the studio is often to create the sort of best case scenario. So like, that's why we put on, or at least often, we put on new drum heads and new guitar strings and new bass strings, and the singer's warmed up and they come in at a good time, right? Like we're creating this sort of like perfect storm of performances, and we're trying to make everyone come in and do their best. And whatever that means, whether that's recording live or individually, or the vocalist records in the morning. I mean, just as simple as that. Like ask the vocalist, like, do you sing better in the morning or at night? And like a lot of vocalists actually sing better in the morning because they're not tired, you know, and they're not worn out. And just simple stuff like that. Like just be aware, you know what I mean? Just be looking at their artist and seeing what they need. And is their energy up? You know, like you got to keep the energy up in the room. They need to be excited and, you know, that they like the sounds, and that when they hear their guitar sound, they're like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Like you want them to be excited about it. And you want them to have time to play around and experiment and, you know, go through different guitars and different guitar amps and, you know, just pick up a pedal or something to have an idea, you know, and you know, you gotta have fun and keep the stress low, you know, always be sort of reading the room, crack jokes, you know, play off their excitement. And if they get discouraged, then you have to be the one to be kind of like, now, of course, I'm talking about like in a producing sort of role, I guess. You know, like if you're just engineering and someone else is producing, like it's not as much your arena to be like keeping the energy up. But that's a big part of being a producer is keeping the band engaged and excited. And if they get discouraged, you know, shift gears and get their mind off of it, or
pick them up. And,
or take a break. Sometimes that's you know what I mean? A 5-minute break is all that it takes, and they're ready to go again. So I would say, you know, just be aware and, you know, don't realize that it's not about your recording. It's about their recording. And, you know, don't get in the way of that.
That's great. That's great. That's great advice there. So how long have you been running the Closet Studios?
It's going on almost actually 10 years. 10 years this year.
Wow. Congratulations. That's awesome. So, you know, there's people out there, maybe they want to start their own studio, you know, whether it's, you know, in their home or whatever. You know, you've done it and you've obviously been successful at it since it's been running for 10 years. What advice would you have for someone wanting to start their own studio?
So I actually made a Facebook post about something similar to this, which is to tell people don't fake it till you make it. Like, this is my opinion, take it or leave it. There's a saying, you know, people say fake it till you make it, which basically is like some self-help thing that says, you know, you act the part, and if you do that long enough, then you'll become that person, you know, like a self-help mantra or something. Mm-hmm. And that might work in certain situations, but in the audio industry, I call BS because, you know, to me, it's irresponsible to do that with people's art. You know, we're not dealing with a client's plumbing or fixing their roof. You know, we're dealing with their art, like, which is often their pride and joy and possibly like their reason for living. So to start a studio and be like, professional studio and professional results when you really aren't getting that great of results, I mean, it's false marketing, really. Like, you know what I mean? You know, the two examples that I used on my Facebook post were, you know, a luthier who claims to be able to repair vintage instruments or restore vintage instruments. And like, if I take a 1930s Martin to them that's worth thousands of dollars to restore, and they're like, yes, I can restore this to its former glory, but they really can't. You know, that's like irresponsible, you know, like it's careless and it demeans the craft. The other example that I shared on the post was that circle around Facebook a couple years ago, that lady who said she could restore the picture of Jesus on the wall, and then it look fuzzy monkey thing.
Yes.
And, you know, and it's like, it's funny to laugh at, but at the same time, it's like, wow, like her ego or whatever got in the way of like 100% confidence that she could do the job. And so the job is service the client. That's the job. And it's their record, it's their music, it's their studio time. They're the ones paying you. So I essentially, to sum this up, my advice for someone looking to start a studio is like, just be honest about your skills. Like, you have to be working on it all the time. But like, if you can make a really solid demo then say that. Like, hey, we're doing a demo deal, you know, $100 a song or $50 a song or whatever, or free. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you got to work for free. Like, you know, you can't just walk onto the scene and be like, oh yeah, I've got my, you know, Neumann TLM 103 and my Yamaha HS8s. I'm going to charge $2,000 a song. And you just, I mean, to me, that's irresponsible. And it's not, it's not honest. It's not, you know, and it's like, there's no shame in being a noob. Like, there's no shame. Like, we were all noobs at one point and we all knew nothing about recording. And, you know, but when you start out, and I've made the same mistake. I'm here to admit it, that I've made the mistake of being like, oh, I'm a professional studio, when I really wasn't. Like, I was like a demo studio or a project studio or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And, you know, I didn't really have professional gear. I didn't have experience. I wasn't doing it full time. I didn't have a full roster of clients. I had only worked on a couple projects. So it was kind of a lie to say that I was a professional. You know, the hard part is like, you know, at what point are you a professional? Like,
sure. Yeah. How do you know?
Yeah. That's the hard thing. And like, for me, sometimes I still am like, am I a professional? I mean, I do it for my profession. I've been doing it for 10 years. I guess I am. But then I think a lot of that too is that we think of professionals like the Icon guys, right? The CLAs and the Dave Pensados, like those are the pros.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and it's hard. It's hard in our industry to know where we stand. And I think that's why some people feel the need to go to school to get a degree, that it gives them some sort of something that says like,
that professional. Yeah. Okay. Well,
yeah,
I've got the
something,
degree.
Right. And, you know, like I said, I don't necessarily think that's needed, but it probably does help the ego a little bit, at least. I mean, because it's hard, because you're sitting around like, what am I? Am I a professional studio? Am I a crappy studio? Am I like, what am I? And, you know, I think that's just the key, is just be honest with customers. And, you know, you can't let your ego, you know, when you start out, you won't make money. Like, you won't make money. You will lose money probably. And, you know, you have to be okay with that. Like, you have to be okay with starting at the bottom and doing work for free, for cheap. You know, my first client paid me with a plate of cookies. That is a true story.
There you go.
That was my first client. The girl I told you about who heard my demo and was like, hey, can you record a demo for me? She paid me with a plate of cookies. And I was totally fine with it, because I was like, I don't really want to work for clients anyway. You know what I mean?
And I'd argue just kind of to speak to that, you know, I think if someone's starting out, you might be happier and have clients that are happier and be more encouraged if you're honest and get people who are maybe not looking for the most pro sound they can find. You know, maybe they're newer into this whole writing music thing, right? You know, and you can grow with them.
Exactly. I think that's a huge, great point, because a lot of my early clients were, you know, new bands that were, you know, 17 years old. Right. And like, they've never recorded before. And so like, we're learning together about the process, and like, they're understanding if we have to redo something or I screw something up, because they don't know, you know what I mean? Like they're like just excited to be a part of it. And that's kind of where you should be too. Like, you should just be excited to be getting experience, you know, whether you make $10 or $50 or no bucks, like, you should just be like, experience is great. I need it. You know, I'm going to do the best I can, even if I'm only getting paid, you know, $20 or something. Like, you know, you can't work on it like you're not getting paid well. You know what I mean? I think that is really hard for, you know, older people, maybe like, you know, older than 30, that try to start studios, because they've worked normal jobs. And so when they're like, I'm putting in 10 hours into this, and you know what I mean?
Where are the zeros?
Right. And so that's hard for them, because they have worked in other jobs, and they've seen like, you know, you can get paid $8 an hour working at a fast food restaurant, and, you know, you get paid $50 to do this song that takes you 3 days. You know what I mean? And your brain is just like ticking, like, what am I doing? But, you know, you have to look at it like, you know, it's almost like your own internship with yourself, where it's not about the money. It really is about just getting out there, starting, just starting with something and working your hardest on it, even if, your reward is the experience and the names on your list, because invariably someone's going to see that and they're going to hear it and they're going to say, hey, that sounds pretty good. And then they'll call you up and say, hey, will you work with me? I don't have a lot of money, and you're like, cool, I don't charge a lot of money.
Let's make something happen. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Kendal, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me today. This was really, really informational and really helpful to hear your thoughts on all this. So thanks so much.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Right on. All right. So that's going to wrap things up for our show and our discussion with Kendal for this week. I again want to thank Kendal for joining me. And if you'd like to learn more about him and what he's doing, you do check out the Recording Lounge podcast or its site, recordingloungepodcast.com. If you're looking to book studio time or you can learn more about the Closet Studios, you can visit theclosetstudios.com. Or you can find him on YouTube at youtube.com/recordinglounge. Thanks so much for listening today. And as a reminder, for links and information about today's show and our guest, please do check out our show notes at audioskills.com/podcast. Now go out there and make some great music.
Ready to go even deeper with your recording, mixing, and music production? We've got all the info and techniques you need in one place so you can turn it up. Go to audioskills.com and access a huge library of video tutorials and private workshops so you make progress even faster. Come back next week for a brand new episode of the Audio Skills Podcast.